Hello everyone and welcome back to another Stitches and Scribbles tutorial. Today we're going to be doing a really easy beanie that can be a last minute gift. It can be made with leftover yarn because you don't even need a full skein to do it. Just to show you what yarn I used, even though I have used it all up on these two beanies, so there's none left. I used the Yarn Bee Sugar Wheel in the color Petit Four Galore. This has, how many yards? About 355 yards per skein, and I only used half of it to make each hat. These hats are a little bit small because I was making them kid-sized, so if you want something a little bit bigger, you may end up using more than half of the skein, but also if you're using a skein with more yardage, as this one had a pretty low yardage, then you should be fine. This beanie was actually made just using a rectangle and some sewing techniques. In addition to the fabric itself, I also have a pom-pom to put on top of the hat and a yarn needle for sewing things up. You could also use a crochet hook. In order to make your base piece of fabric, your cast on or number of chain stitches across needs to fit around your head, like where the brim of the hat would sit, and that's how you know that your piece is wide enough that it will fit on your head when you are done. Once you have made your cast on, you can use any stitch that you want. I ended up doing a Tunisian crochet honeycomb stitch for the body of my piece, and this is actually all one yarn. It's just a self-striping one, which I like for hats because it makes it really easy but still interesting to look at. The last thing that you're gonna keep in mind is, well, actually there's two parts to this, but at the end you're going to want to have some sort of a ribbed stitch, otherwise your piece may curl, which if you're fine with that, then that's totally fine. And you want the length of your piece to be slightly longer than the crown of your head to where you want it to sit on your forehead. You can see, since these two were about the same length, that when we sew it up, it loses some of that length due to the way that we gather it, so it needs to be a little bit longer than what you think you need, if that makes sense. Alright, let's sew this up. I'm going to start by folding my piece in half, and I am putting my wrong sides together just because I want my stitches to be a little bit more hidden. And I'm going to tie on the yarn that I'm going to use to sew this piece together. And if you leave your tail long enough while you are working the piece, then you won't need to do this step, but I forgot to leave it long enough, so I'm just tying on another piece of yarn in order to make that work. I'm going to thread my yarn needle. Okay. Then you're going to want to sew from your brim up to the top of your hat, making sure that you keep those pieces really tightly together. If you've watched any of my other tutorials, you probably already know that when I do seaming like this, I like to use a mattress stitch because I think it's a little bit sturdier, but you can use the stitch of your choice. If you are doing this with a crochet piece, you could even do a slip stitch join up the side to give it a really sturdy seam. But to do that mattress stitch, all I'm doing is going in and out on opposite sides. If you could see the yarn by itself, it would be zigzagging through the two sides of my piece. You can see my tails are kind of getting caught in there. So you're just going to keep working that all the way up to the top of your piece. So you can go ahead and finish that and check back in when you are done with your sewing. Alright, once you have sewn up the side, we're going to start gathering at the top. Now what I do for this is a whip stitch because it cinches better, so I'm just threading that needle under, over along the edge of my piece and then pulling through. We are going to be pulling this tight at the end, so your stitches don't need to be perfect because we're going to pull them all together. Keep doing that all the way around. Till you get back to where you started. So now we're going to pull that string tight to cinch up the top of the hat. This makes it kind of bulky at the top, which is why I always sew a pom-pom on over it, kind of to hide it. But to really pull it in tighter, I'm going to do some stitches across the entire opening to really pull that together. So I did one across from where I started, and then I'm going to do one perpendicular to that stitch, and then try to get the diagonal. This part also doesn't really have to be perfect because it's all going to end up cinched inside this part of the hat. If you have any big pieces sticking out like I do here, this is your chance to get them and kind of sew them in. Like so. Now you're going to stick your yarn needle through that center and pull it out the other side, and then we're going to flip the whole project inside out to sew on the pom-pom. So you can see at the top, that's what our gather looks like, and this is what the outside body of the hat looks like. If you're using a pom-pom like the one I am, it should have a little loop on the bottom made of elastic, and that's what we're going to use to attach it. If you're using a handmade pom-pom, you can just sew right through. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing to the pom-pom that I did to close up the top of that gather. So I'm going to thread through that loop and kind of just go in and out repeatedly between the loop and the hat, making that same crisscrossing pattern like I did to seal up the top of the hat. And this is where it's going to be impossible to see what I'm doing, so I apologize for that. But as long as your pom-pom ends up securely connected, this part doesn't really matter how you do it as long as it ends up adhered. And once you've made a couple stitches, it should be pretty secure. So you can go ahead and thread your needle back to the inside of the hat and either create a knot to tie it off, or if you have another loose thread hanging there from your work, you can tie those two in a knot together to secure it. And then all that's left to do is weave in the ends. So you have a super easy hat from a rectangle. This is a great way to use up some extra yarn if you have more than like 200 yards left that you need to use up. It's really easy to adjust the sizes. It's also a great way to practice a new stitch because it's a pretty small project with no increases or decreases. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that this is going to be a great last minute stocking stuffer for your holiday needs. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!